Alright, so in this video we're going to go over how to create a VPC and configure it. First thing we need to do is, after we've logged in, is make sure we're in the correct region. So if you look over here on the top right, I'm in the Oregon region. So let's go ahead and, I've already been to VPC. If recently visited, it doesn't show it for you. Just type in VPC in the search services, open that up. And then let's go to VPCs here. This is the default VPC. You could configure this one, but I don't want to do that because if I mess something up, I like to have the ability to delete it. You cannot delete the default VPC in a region. If you do that, you can't recreate it. So let's go ahead and create our own. Let's create VPC in this button on the right over here. And we're going to do VPC only because we want to create all the other services around it ourselves. Just call it my VPC. And the CIDR block, I'm going to use 10.0.0.0/16. And you might be asking, why don't you just type, if you're just going to be using one subnet, just type in /24. You could do that, but then you're really limited on what you can do in that VPC. You can't expand that beyond that CIDR block. So it's better just to undercommit your private IPs. That way you can create as many as you need later on. But the max is a /16. All right, so we're not going to create an IPv6 CIDR block. We're going to go with default tenancy. The dedicated is on dedicated hardware. It's super expensive, so we're not going to go with that. We're not going to use VPC encryption controls. All that stuff costs extra money, so let's go ahead and hit create VPC here. All right, so we created the VPC. The next step is creating the subnets. So now that we created this VPC, you'll notice on the bottom here, it gives you a resource map. It kind of goes over like what got created. We created our VPC. We didn't create any subnets yet. It did create a default route table for us. There's no network connections associated with this VPC just yet. So let's go ahead and go to subnets because that's our next step. And we're going to go to create subnet. We're going to choose our VPC. And let's call it subnet 10.01. And then you want to make sure that your subnets are in the same availability zone, especially if they're communicating, because if they're not in the same AZ, you're going to get charged for traffic going between those VPCs. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm just going to just choose US West 2A, and the CIDR block is the one we created. And then the subnet out of that CIDR block is going to be 10.0.1.0/24. And then that looks good. The tag looks good. Create the subnet. All right, now that we have the subnet created, we need to create a route table. So let's go route tables, which is the next option down. And that is the default one that came with the default VPC. So let's create the route table. And let's call it my route table. Choose the VPC, there we go, and that all looks good. Create route table, and in order to associate that subnet we created with this route table, we need to go to subnet associations and edit associations here, and we're going to select that subnet we just created and then save association. Okay, so now it's associated with that route table. Let's go back to our VPCs here. So we've got our VPC here that we created. Now, the next step is creating an internet gateway. This allows us to have internet access from our EC2 instances. So let's go ahead and there's already one on here. We're going to create our own. Create internet gateway on the top right there. And then call it gateway. And create the internet gateway. Now that we create it, we have to associate with the VPC, so attach to VPC, or you can do interactions here too. Let's go ahead and attach that and choose our VPC, attach it. Okay, so now it's associated with the VPC. Okay, you might be asking, why do we have to create that internet gateway? In order for traffic to get out to the internet, we have to have a way to get out, and that internet gateway allows us to do that. So let's go back to our route tables, and let's go to my route table here. And let's go ahead and create a route. Let's do this up so we can see this here. Edit routes, and we're going to add a route here. So right now, the default route is just within that CIDR block. Actually, the destination is going to be out to the internet, and our target's going to be the internet gateway we just created. It's asking which one, so we're going to select My Internet Gateway and hit Save here. All right, now when we create an EC2 instance, we'll be able to get out to the internet using this route table. All right, so now that we've created all this, is all set up now in order for us to be able to create EC2 instances, access the internet, download patches, whatever we need to do. So let's go ahead and test that. We're going to go ahead and create an EC2 instance. I'm going to kind of fly through this process just for testing purposes. I will do another video later on creating EC2 instances and all the settings that go with that. I'll also do another video on migrating EC2 instances from on-prem destination. All right, so let's go ahead and go to EC2. There we go. All right, so now let's go ahead and we're going to launch an EC2 instance, and I'm just going to call it or just test EC2. And there's thousands of images you can create from. You can do Windows, AWS Linux, Ubuntu, Red Hat. There's just tons of stuff in here. I'm going to go ahead and just use the default one just so we can test this quickly. So we're going to use Amazon Linux here. I'm going to go with the image, this image here, and then the default settings, like instance type and size. It's fine. Let's go ahead and we create a key pair here if we're going to be using PuTTY. I might do connect from the console, but let's just go ahead and download this now just to be safe. So let's call it here, and PPK. That's good. Okay, create the key. All set there. All right, now we need to edit the network settings because the default settings are not going to be correct. So it's going with the default VPC. We don't want to use that. Let's select our VPC. The subnet is correct, and we're going to allow it to auto assign a public IP address because we need that if we're going to use PuTTY to connect to it. Let's go ahead and create a security group and allow SSH from anywhere, which is fine for now because we're just doing testing. And I think that's good. So let's go ahead and launch the instance. All right, let's go to instances here. And I'm going to pause the video because it just takes a little while to initialize the instance and spin it up. Okay, that took a little while, but we finally got our EC2 instance up and running. Now we can test accessing the internet. So let's go ahead. There's a connect button up here. You can use that, or if you want to use PuTTY, which I'm old school, so I like using PuTTY. Go ahead and put in the IP address. I guess I needed that first, though, didn't I? Let's copy the public IP here and go to PuTTY and put that in. Oh, there we go. And then I need to go down to connection, SSH, off, credentials, and then I'm going to browse for that key pair that I downloaded and hit open and accept. Alright, so the default login for a Linux distro, AWS Linux distro, is EC2 user. And I'm in. Okay, so now let's test getting out. So let's ping google.com. And there you go. We got out. Perfect. Alright, so in this video, let's go back to VPC. Alright, so in this video, I showed you how to create a VPC. I showed you how to create subnets within the VPC. We created our own route table, and then we also created an internet gateway to allow us to get out to the internet from our EC2 instances. Hopefully this video was helpful to you.